Alright, happy Friday folks. This is the Argumentative Essay Approach video here, 2017 prompts the one we're working on. And on Fridays, what I'm going to do is go through the essay as my thought process would be as I'm going through one of these essays here. You got 40 minutes to basically write the entire thing, but in the starting point of the AP exam for the essay portion, they'll give you 15 minutes to plan out how you might approach the essays, your thesis, thought process, all that. So I would kind of like designate maybe like 5 minutes each per essay, and then later accordingly as you're doing the full essays themselves, the full 2-hour process that they give you here. So without further ado, let me go over the argumentative essay and just kind of the mindset you might have while you're doing these essays all together. For this essay, or any essay that we go over on Fridays, what you want to do is to learn how to get comfortable with them. Get comfortable with the prompts altogether, get comfortable with outlining, so you can time yourself, that's fine. But I would rather you just get used to what good writing requires, or all the components that might be required on the argumentative essay, the rhetorical analysis essay, and the synthesis essay here. So, in short, the purpose of these videos and this task here on Fridays is just make sure that you get used to how to write without anxiety. Because if you think about the biggest issue for a lot of students on these exams, it's because they don't have a game plan. It's because they don't know how to interact with the prompts, and it's because they overcomplicate it. It's not that complicated, but with a time crunch, it does feel that much more constraining. So in this case, take it slow, get used to it. It's kind of like practice, right? When you're doing like a sport, for example, these are your workout days, your conditioning days. That's not the real game day itself yet. On those days, you put in everything, but for these days, you get used to it. You can make mistakes and all that. It's all good. So in this case, just get used to how to train your thought process to approach an argumentative prompt. So the 2017 prompt, and I'll read this all verbatim in a second here, is an essay that requires you to basically take a stance, right? As mentioned on Monday, it's all about is it right or wrong, or where do you stand on this issue here? It's all about that in relations to a quote, for example, a passage. If they give you a passage like this, it's actually a lot more beneficial in the sense that although it's dangerous in the sense that it could be like something that's really jargony or very nuanced, it also gives you a lot of room to build your own ideas off of when you have someone else's thought process presented here. So the passage below is an excerpt from Empire of Illusion by Chris Hedges. Read the passage carefully, then write an essay in which you develop a position on Hedges' argument that, quote, the most essential skill, ... is artifice. Use appropriate specific evidence to illustrate and develop your position. And this is different because a lot of the argumentative essays that we've done before, the task was usually the second paragraph, whereas in this one, it's the very first one because the passage comes afterwards here. So this is the tricky part. You have to develop your position on his argument here, which in turn means that you have to understand his argument first and foremost. So the prompt basically designates itself to the entire first line here, but obviously anything afterwards is very useful. So I'll kind of run through this entire passage here and just contextualize it for your better understanding. So the most essential skill in political theater and a consumer culture is artifice. So largely in these two worlds here, politics and consumer culture. Political leaders who use the tools of mass propaganda to create a sense of faux intimacy with citizens no longer need to be competent, sincere, or honest. Meaning, we live in a time period where a lot of politicians don't need to actually care for you. They just need to look like they care for you. They need only to appear to have these qualities. Most of all, they need a story, a personal narrative. The reality of the narrative is irrelevant. It can be completely at odds with the facts. The consistency and emotional appeal of the story are paramount. Those who are best at deception succeed. Those who have not mastered the art of entertainment, who fail to create a narrative or do not have one fashioned for them by their handlers, are ignored. They become unreal. Which is kind of ironic. We live in a time period where even if the story is completely fake, everyone needs a story basically. Everyone needs an alibi. Everyone needs some sort of, this phoniness to them in order to succeed. And those who don't, they seem even more phony despite the fact that they're being most real to you. So the very last line says, an image-based culture communicates through narratives, pictures, and pseudodrama. And so that's where we are today in society. We are basically buying everything with our eyes. If it looks real, we think it's real, and there it is. So I actually brought this quote here from Edgar Degas. He's a painter, but at the same time, he's kind of like a philosopher regarding painting. He says, art is in the same word as artifice. That is to say, something deceitful. It must succeed in giving the impression of nature by false means, which is interesting in the sense that what is art trying to do? Art is an image trying to persuade you that it's real. So if I have a painting of a tree, for example, you're thinking to yourself, oh, that's a tree. Oh, gotcha. That was art, actually. That was just me trying to fool you that it is a tree, when in fact, it is simply my imagination or my representation or copy of it. Same thing with where we are today. It's all about how can I sell an image to you, making you think it's real. So I have to first understand the prompt's task, right? This is the first part of the entire reading here. I have to understand what's asking from me. So the first part is, we have to write an essay regarding Hedges' point on artifice. Do you agree it's true or not that it's the most essential skill amongst politicians in consumer culture? We should spend some time in the intro contextualizing what Hedges meant by that. So this is where the passage really helps us. Your intro paragraph doesn't have to be long usually, but it can in this case if you want to speak a little bit more about what Hedges meant and how you can apply that to modern society. A little bit of a prelude to your entire essay here. And then lastly, by the thesis, we need a stance on what Hedges' point was. Is he correct or is he not? And on either stance, if he, correct or not, why is he correct, right? So in this case, you want to make sure that both you have a stance, but also give a reason to why you think artifice is the most important skill or it's not or whatever. That's something you should do by your thesis, but obviously you want to kind of like make sure that before your thesis, you're transitioning to where your stance is already. The passage itself, we're going to pull some important things from here to use for the essay. Number one, artifice is the most essential skill in political theater and consumer culture. This is super useful for me to build my body paragraphs because I can talk about these two cases in my own world, my own example here. Even though Hedges brings it up in his non-example passage here, I can speak more about why it's important in politics and consumer culture. If you didn't know what artifice means, this is also why a passage is super helpful in terms of defining it for you. So you had words like propaganda, faux, which means fake, opposite of anything revolving around honesty, sincerity, or competence. So in this case, artifice just basically means anything of like a false nature, right? And then lastly, the last line suggests that this happens in an image-based culture. So you can kind of set everything into the world of news or social media or whatever, right? Things that communicate through image-based. And that is a nice sort of grounding for us. It's not just everything in the world. It's just largely a society that runs around this stuff here. So my first 3 minutes, what I want to do is, for any essay, starting, any outlining, whatever, I have to figure out what do I think is the stance that I take on this here. So in looking at this, well, for my own impression, this is my first 3 minutes, I thought, you know what, I do agree with this passage because of the results of artifice, meaning that the more I thought about it, most politicians do usually succeed when they use artifice, and they usually get their means done when they use artifice. If you look at American politics and consumer culture, people aren't resisting artifice. In fact, they are easily won over with narratives and images and drama, which is kind of true, right? Like, most Americans aren't going to fact check, and most Americans are going to buy what is told on the surface level. So in this case, they buy it, they react to it, boom. That seems to be a very cultural thing. People largely are not informed on every single issue, every piece of history, every fact that goes into the discussion. They are easily led astray. So for my impression, it seems even more so that artifice is successful in our society because most people aren't informed. Most people don't care to be informed. And so when their leaders, quote unquote, are leading them with artifice, they're going to think, oh, this person has good ethos, therefore I follow them. And it's kind of like, yeah, but you didn't do any research on your own, right? I mean, even looking at the recent COVID thing, for example, people in America are saying this is going to blow over in a few days. Not really, right? So in this case, the artifice of knowing what to do, being in charge, that blew over very quickly. And now here we are. So my question also, along with the stance, maybe this is a danger of a non-informed, non-intellectual society. Maybe when people are less read than they should be or they don't care to be informed, we risk being in a situation like this. All right, first 3 minutes, that was my entire thought process, right? I have a stance that I agree with artifice being the most essential skill for politicians and consumers, but now I gotta make sure I have some evidence, like why is it important and how does it work out, right? So This doesn't seem like a very long essay to me, especially if you're running low on time because argumentative is the last essay. 2 body paragraphs would suffice if you have really good examples. And you can split up whatever way you want, but at least for me, the easiest, the least path of resistance is I make 2 paragraphs, one on political theater and one on consumer culture, just as the passage provides. But now I gotta make sure, do I have evidence for both categories? For political theater, I'm thinking about like presidents who use artifice, those who seem to be like one of the people, those who seem to talk about the fact that they're associated with a certain class, like working class, middle class. Maybe a little political bias, but I will talk about the recent Trump administration, how he uses artifice to basically buy the votes of poor people and the people who feel like they've been disenfranchised by the American political system. So in this case, that's my first example. A more broader example would be perhaps the artifice of buzzwords. If you look at a lot of politicians, they always talk about working class, education, middle class, healthcare. They show concern, but they never do anything about it per se. So in this case, it shows the lack of fulfilling these promises, but the artifice is there because they know these buzzwords add to their ethos, the story of the caring politician. And I mentioned this earlier, lastly, the recent COVID-19 thing. Like, it shows how politicians can instill fear and panic for people because it is like a dramatic thing, right? Like, Americans are not reacting well compared to the rest of the world. So in this case, we can kind of consider how the artifice of care can also be misinterpreted when people don't really understand the situation, because there wasn't really good information being given. There's so much misinformation given regarding this topic here. In the same 5 minutes, I know it's a very big time crunch, but in the very same 5 minutes, I also got to think about the same points I would make for consumer culture. So my next body paragraph or paragraphs, I'm thinking about, okay, well, how does artifice serve in consumer culture? Number one, I think we talked about this year, maybe in 2A, but we talk about the idea of like cheap labor and sweatshops and everything, and how our products in society are using the labor of human beings for our own benefits. And so in this case, the artifice of like, I don't know, organic or worker friendly, whatever, it's kind of like, that's good ethics shopping, but it's not really, right? Because we know the reality of how our products are actually made, which goes back to what I mentioned, I think in first semester, Slavoj Žižek. I meme about this all the time, cultural capitalism, the idea that we are basically trying to buy our redemption, right? You go to Starbucks, you buy, donation for some kid in Africa. It's kind of like, okay, that's nice, but are you really solving the issue there? And the artifice there is, we are all helping. No, we are not. We're all just drinking coffee. And number 3, it seems like advertisement culture is about selling a product that doesn't look as it does on the commercials. And that's where artifice is, right? How do you sell a burger that looks great on TV to people who don't think too much about it or will get a crappier product in return? So in this case, artifice is all about selling jinkier products for high costs to a non-knowing society. And so that seems to be what consumer culture is. It's buying and selling on the idea of ignorance. So I have, by this point, it should have been like about 8 minutes or so in the entire planning process, but my next 5 or 7 is where I want to make sure I have an outline of the entire essay now. I'm thinking, okay, I gotta have a thesis and at least a topic sentence / transition from one body paragraph to another. So my thesis is pretty short and simple. It goes something like this. In a complacent, non-resilient society, artifice is in fact key in manipulating the masses. It's a little bit shorter. It seems to be more of a statement in this case here. I have a slight tinge of argument in this case here of the wording of is in fact key in manipulating the masses. So I definitely agree with Hedges here, right? Without being too explicit, but it's a very broad thesis in which, if you look at my next 2 body paragraphs, I hope to expand more with my topic sentences here. So just keep it short and simple to the point, and you want to make sure you have a stance in terms of how you see the topic itself. For body 1, I write, in the sphere of politics, many subscribe blindly to what their leaders say due to the artificial ethos displayed that appears to, quote, help them. And that's what most Americans have the problem of. They think their politicians are out there to help them. Generally, right? I mean, we're more skeptical now, but the problem with artifice is that people think first and foremost, hey, this decision is here to help me. Is it though? You never really know. So my next examples will be supported with what I see in politics in general. Body 2, Likewise, American corporations and businesses. Okay, so I got a transition going on here. I say likewise because corporations and politics are kind of similar in terms of their means of persuading people. So in this case, American corporations and businesses understand that most Americans enjoy their ability to shop to the point they do not question the product's development or integrity. So I qualify that a little bit, right? People like shopping. Okay, how much? To the point that they don't question their products and everything because the artifice is there to persuade them away from that, to question or challenge or whatever. So in this case, I have my outline set up here. I relate my points as best as possible, and everything feeds into my thesis, right? A complacent, non-resilient society, a society that doesn't question what information is given to them. So my essay in 15 minutes is nearly complete. In about 15 minutes or so, I have the thesis, I have my points of evidence, I have my topic sentences. In 15 minutes, really, you want to make sure that you have everything set up where the only thing you have to worry about in the next 25, 30-ish minutes is good writing, basically, to make sure that you have all your points linking with each other and transitioning with each other. That's it. You don't have to go super detailed, but you want to make sure you have very clear examples from point to point to point. Conclusion paragraphs are definitely welcomed, and I encourage you to always write one, as short as it may be, but in this case, having a full essay laid out helps me better understand, well, what do I want to say at the very end of this essay here regarding artifice and all that, and that's the benefit of having a full essay laid out when you can see where your conclusion might come up to. So for me, my conclusion is this. I agree that artifice is the most essential thing, but I don't want it to be the norm of politicians and corporations. I want people to actually get genuine information or to fight back against artifice. So in this case, maybe for the aim of sophistication, I argue that there should be a solution, that we need to be less complacent. We need forms of education that will enlighten people, PSAs, schools themselves, colleges, whatever. We need to slowly reveal more of where artifice exists in our everyday lives. So in this case, it shifts people away from being controlled by artifice to challenging those in power and manipulating us through artifice. And in that, my entire essay feels complete, and that will probably be based on the entire guidelines of thesis, evidence. I got 6 evidences. That's plenty to work with here. And a conclusion, it seems to be a full-blown 6 out of 6 essay. So in that regards, demystify the AP exam, look at those prompts that they give you online, and just think to yourself, okay, slow it down real quick. What are the 3 criterias? How can I use this format to kind of like, build an essay? And then from there, go on. And just like the take-home essay that I'm giving you guys for grading period 5, you can do the same process. It's a little lengthier, don't get me wrong, which next week's synthesis stuff should help. But otherwise, just take it slow. Outline your essay. Think step by step, side step. How can I formulate an essay?